Hatzlahain Oikalo. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcoming Rena Priest to Washington State University's Visiting with Writers series. Inamoni class, Julian Ankney, instructor in the English department and coordinator of Native American programs and co-director of the Visiting Writers series here at WSU Vancouver. I am joining you from inside our Vancouver campus classroom, so that's why you kind of see me standing at the podium. I'd like to thank our campus partners at WSU Pullman, WSU Tri-Cities, WSU Vancouver, and the English department's Common Reading Series, ASWSU, Landscapes, the Office of Equity and Diversity, Native American Programs, and the Campus Literary Journal. I would also like to thank our tech wizards, Rob Baker and Brian Varner. Without them, we would literally cease to exist here. So can't see how you know guys. As well as my partner in crime and co-director of the Visiting Writer Series, Cameron Reed McGill, on tech tonight. Katsiao Yao Oikalo, thank you all, our esteemed audience, for making the time to be here with us tonight. We are all far flung in these virtual times and events, and we'd love to see you put in the chat where you're from and whose Indigenous land you currently reside on. Tonight, I come to you from the homelands of the Chinook, Hainapam, and the Cowlitz Indian tribe here in Vancouver, Palouse or Palouse people in Pullman, residing on Numipuates or Nez Perce lands, and our connection to them. Washington State University acknowledges its locations statewide are on the homelands of Indigenous people. Oh. The university expresses its deepest respect for and gratitude towards these original and current caretakers of the region. We also pledge that these relationships will consist of mutual trust, respect, and reciprocity. I also want to remind you that land acknowledgements are just one step towards honoring Indigenous peoples' long presence on all US lands and recognizing our continuing connection to the earth, water, air, and to our Anacoma ancestors. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. Please use the YouTube chat to engage and respond throughout the reading. And we will also have a Q&A after Priest's reading where you can ask your burning questions. So please be ready for that. Our next event is hosted by, of course, WSU Visiting Writers Series, virtual and in-person reading Q&A with multimedia fiber artist, playwright, and poet, Sarah Hennessy, March 28th, at Tuesday, March 28th at 6 p.m. And you can also enroll in a 1-credit 5-minute play writing workshop. And that's going to be Wednesday, March 29th from 5:45 to 8:30. So look for that on our website, which should be that should also be in the chat. We hope to see you there. If you are here for the Common Reading event, we will put the Qualtrics link in the chat towards the end of the reading. So watch for it. Tonight, we have a big go Cougs for Rena Priest. Rena Priest is a member of the Lumi Nation. She is the Washington State Poet Laureate and Maxine Cushing Gray Distinguished Writers Fellow. Priest is also the recipient of an Allied Arts Foundation Professional Poets Award, an American Book Award, and fellowship from the Academy of American Poets, the Atero, the Vaden Foundation, and Indigenous Nations Poet. She has authored 3 books and edited 2 anthologies. She holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College, and you can learn more at renapriest.com. Katsiao again, thank you, and we'd like to welcome Rena Priest to the Visiting with Writers series. Thank you, Rena.
Hi, Ishka. Thank you so much, Julian. I am so pleased to be with you here this evening. Ait squal and astrologia o helix and conasatla tiakai sohaltanat and asnat chocholamisan. Just a few words to say how happy I am to join you all this evening. And also thank you to Julian and Brian and Cameron and Rob for the work that you do in putting this offering together. I just had an exciting thing happen where I could hear it coming through YouTube and I could hear it coming through Zoom. And I thought, how is this happening? And they definitely had the fix for me right away. So anyhow, a shout out to everyone who makes things happen behind the scenes here. So I'm going to start this evening with a poem that I wrote that is a land acknowledgement. I'm often invited to do land acknowledgements, and whenever I go to a new place and I try to learn about the people whose land I'm acknowledging, the stories are always very painful and they're everywhere, right? And so I realized, traveling around, that pretty much anywhere that there was water and it's hospitable and habitable and beautiful and good for people to live, usually where there are cities now, those were the homelands, the ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples. And so I wrote this poem called Welcome to Indian Country, acknowledging that anywhere you go, pretty much in the Western Hemisphere, is Indian country. Where is Indian country? It's everywhere we stand. It's anywhere we dance. It's where the earth loves the feel of our feet. Welcome to Indian country. What does that mean? It means this is where we lift our voice in song and make a joyful drum beat so our hearts can sing along. Welcome to Indian country, this beloved country here, where we honor our ancestors by growing stronger every year, by making laughter the answer that wipes away our tears. Welcome to Indian country. What does the future hold? In uncertain times like these, we reach for words like hope and things we can be sure of: sunrises, beauty, love. Welcome to Indian country. It's everywhere we dance and where the feast is truly grand. Welcome to Indian country. Now give us back our land. So when I was in graduate school, one of the things that they taught us was that when you want to make the one way to get to epiphany and have it kind of be unsettling or jarring or surprising is to set it up with a lot of images that are counter to whatever the thing is that you're setting up at the end. So people, when I share that live, people often kind of chuckle, but I don't think it's because they think it's funny. I think it's because it's unexpected. It's a surprise. And as you know, when you're talking about difficult things, it's always good if you can set people at ease a little bit with laughter. Okay, so this next poem is called A Study of Light, just because I think we're heading towards brighter days. It's been a long, dark, gray, very dark winter in Bellingham, where I'm from. And so it's nice to see the sunshine. This is a poem that I wrote celebrating the summer solstice. And it is in an anthology collected by the Chestnut Sandstone writers, coordinator Carla Schaefer in Bellingham. And I think it's called Solstice, Light and Dark on the Salish Sea. I think that's the title of that anthology. The longest day is a study of light. When light behaves as discrete particles, it makes waves, but only when observed, or so I've heard. In my ancestral language, I recently learned the word for river is the same as the word for Milky Way. The light today is torrential, unrelenting. It pours and I am caught in it. I can't stop it, so I lift my head and let it soak me while the luminous day goes on and on and on. I love those kinds of days. So yeah, in the beginning there, when I'm talking about when light behaves as discrete particles, it makes waves, but only when observed. If you look up the double slit experiment, this is really cool. You'll find that scientists have studied light particles, photons, I guess, and they behave differently. So they have a camera set up and they watch it. They send it through two slits, and it disperses in a wave pattern on against the wall. And when the cameras are on, the wave pattern is in fact waves. It disperses as though the photons are traveling in waves. When the cameras are off, it actually shows that, well, when the light particles think that the camera's off. So that's, crazy light particles thinking. Anyway, it shows that they disperse in a particle pattern. So sometimes they behave like waves and sometimes they're particles. So it's something that scientists would like to figure out, and they say there's a big prize in it for anyone who can do that. So knowing that and thinking about how the ancestors talked about the Milky Way as they called it a river. So the word for Milky Way is stalo, and that's the same as the word for river. And so they understood light and water as kind of having similar qualities. And so those kind of come together in my mind. And that's just a little insight into how these crazy poems get made. Okay, so next, I'll share a poem. I'll tell a story. Last year in April, I think actually last year, yeah, I was getting ready to go right about now to Joy Harjo's closing ceremonies at the Library of Congress, and the Indigenous Nations poets had their inaugural fellowship convening in Washington, D.C., and we spent a week there at the Library of Congress as their guests, and we were in workshops and conversation, and it was really beautiful to be there with, so many other Indigenous poets for that, to mark that special occasion of Joy Harjo completing her term as her third term, actually, as United States Poet Laureate. And while we were there, like I say, we were in workshops, and Lucy Tapahanso, who has previously served as the Dene Poet Laureate, she offered a workshop on how to write a villanelle, and it was great. She said a lot of really useful and beautiful things, but the one thing that stuck out is that she said, "Oh, writing a villanelle is easy. You find a phrase that bears repeating, and then you plug it in, and then you're almost halfway done." And so this poem is called Lucy Teaches the Villanelle, and it's a villanelle. Words infused with depth and meaning require brave voices to speak those truths that bear repeating. Breath of a song to soften hard feelings, strength and courage to patiently seek words infused with depth and meaning. These are the gifts poets use to sing and celebrate the silence they break, telling hard truths that bear repeating. Our works are a balm for history's sting, to comfort the weary, embolden the meek, by words infused with depth and meaning. We rejoice in our lives and ways of being. We use our precious voice to make new truths that will bear repeating. We know our joy by dancing. We know our power. We know our peak. In words infused with depth and meaning, we speak our truths that bear repeating. The other thing that I didn't mention in introducing that poem is that for part of her closing ceremonies, Joy Harjo's wish was that the last thing that she did as Poet Laureate of the United States was have a dance party on the steps of the Library of Congress, and they accommodated that request. And so we all had this really beautiful dance party, and the weather was perfect, and the sun was perfect, and the music was great, and it was just the most fun ever. So, that line, we know our joy by dancing, we know our power, we know our peak. That's kind of also a little memory of that day that I kind of snuck into the poem too. Anyhow, sometimes I teach a workshop called Poem as Personal Archive, and how, the memories and things that we want to hang on to, we can put them into our poems. And, maybe audiences will find them relatable, but the thing about that is that we will always have that you know, whether it's a phrase that we remember hearing from childhood, or if it's like just something beautiful that happened that we want to hang on to, just weave it right into a poem. And then anytime you read that poem or share that poem, you will have that memory again. So kind of nice. And this poem actually does that too. It's called Tour of a Salmonberry. And every year when the salmon berries pop and they're out in the landscape, my mom always says, she tells the story of how her grandpa used to tell her if she ate a lot of berries, she'd have a sweet voice. So this is called Tour of a Salmonberry. A salmonberry is a luminous spiral, a golden basket woven of sunshine, water, and birdsong. I'm told that the birds sing so sweet because of all the berries they eat, and that is how you can have a sweet voice too. In my native language, the word for salmonberry is alila. In Sanskrit, lila means God plays. Salmonberries sometimes look that way. Every year they debut spectacular in the landscape, worthy of their genus name, Rubus spectabilis, meaning red sight worth seeing. Each druplet holds a seed and the shimmering secret kept by rain of how to rise, float above the earth, feel the sun, and return. So this poem, I actually also learned something new while writing this poem, which I also like to do whenever I write. I kind of like to write for discovery and exploration as well as archival purposes. But in this poem, as I was writing it, I thought, gosh, what are the little bulbs on a berry called? And each little bulb, it has a name. I thought maybe it was a long shot, but I thought, well, let's try to find it. And of course, Google is such a wonderful thing. Like you can find out anything just by like typing in a few words. It's called a druplet. So whenever you look at a berry, each little globe on a berry, that's called a druplet, and they hold a seed. So anyhow, that's kind of a fun little fact there. I think we'll stick with this theme of light, a study of light, and I'll read to you from my first book, Patriarchy Blues. Those poems that you just heard are all uncollected, so you can find some of them in various places around the internet, but they're not collected in a book yet. They're in a manuscript, they're just not published. Anyhow, this poem is called Dear Mr. Schaefer, and it's a different kind of light that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about lasers and electron microscopes. But anyways, okay. Dear Mr. Schaefer, if I had the right kind of laser and you had an electron microscope, I could write secret love letters to you in the curve of a paperclip. They might be short little verses about the abundant nature of love. The paperclip might be holding together a movie script about the apocalypse and scarcity. Maybe when you pulled the message encoded paperclip from the script, every page would tumble away to be edited by wear and rough weather, so that only the sweetest lines were legible. Only the words you and enough, and you are always enough. So that weeks later, when strangers on train platforms picked up the scraps, gusted into their hair, they might feel as if they were getting love letters from the wind. Okay, here. And here's another sciencey poem and it's also from this book, Patriarchy Blues. It's called Van der Waals Force. You take my hand, look at my fingerprints and ask, did I ever tell you how a gecko sticks to the ceiling? You explain how gecko toes have grooves that turn into a forest of hairs, which have smaller subhairs with a forest of smaller subhairs and so on, until at the very tips are atoms. So the gecko toe and the ceiling atoms are joined, become one, momentarily indistinguishable. And it's so freaky cool, you say. The military has studied it. They've tried, but they can't manufacture anything like that. I find that there's a lot of really good overlap between science and poetry. And I feel like it's because both are interested in looking deeply at the world and questioning the world, and just, they both take a deep interest in the world. And so, there's the discoveries in science lend themselves well to the writing of poems. And this poem actually is an example of that. It's called Daybreak Song, and it has an epigraph taken from New Scientist, September 21st, 2016. The headline was, "Fish recorded singing dawn chorus on reefs, just like birds." Below the waves, even the unheard, unseen world sings. The sun lights the earth another day, and every living thing greets the dawn with its own primordial ritual. But not me, and probably not you either. I have no such ceremonies, only habits. In winter, I wake to alarms in the dark. I feel my way to the snooze button, then light switch. The sacred celebration of another day on earth, the birds and the fish singing, all of that happens as I sit in traffic and think of my ancestors, feel the heaviness of grief, wonder if I've wandered from my home, wonder why I've wandered from my home, where still at dawn the people wake, face east and sing. Not all the people, but I definitely know some people who do that, and it's a really beautiful ritual. And I think that that's something that would probably help me if I adopted it. Probably help a lot of people to have some way of greeting the day in a way that was meaningful. Okay, so this poem is called "The Forest for the Trees," and it's available at poets.org with a teaching guide. So if there are any people out there who are interested in teaching a poem for any particular reason, this has a teaching guide at poets.org. And I think if you just Google my name and "The Forest for the Trees," their segment on the website, Teach This Poem, features this poem and has a little curriculum attached to it. So, "The Forest for the Trees." I have seen a tree split in two from the weight of its opposing branches. It can survive, though its heart is exposed. I have seen a country do this too. I have heard an elder say that we must be like the willow, bend not to break. I have made peace this way. My neighbors clear-cut their trees, leaving mine defenseless. The arborist says they'll fall in the first strong wind. Together we stand. I see this now. I have seen a tree grown around a bicycle, a street sign, and a chainsaw, absorbing them like ingredients in a great melting pot. When we speak, whether or not we agree, the trees will turn the breath of our words from carbon dioxide back into air, give us new breath for new words, new chances to listen, new chances to be heard. So that was first published in Humanities Washington's magazine that they put out biannually called Spark. And since I'm mentioning it, I would like to give a shout out to Humanities Washington and the Washington State Arts Commission for their support of the Poet Laureate program. We've selected the new incoming Poet Laureate, and I'm so very excited for that announcement to be made. It's just kind of been torture, keeping a secret is so hard. When they told me that I was going to be Poet Laureate, it was January, and they said, "You can't tell anyone, we'll announce it in April." And I was like, oh no, it was just the hardest thing to keep that under my hat for so long. I did tell my boss so that she wasn't caught by surprise when I told her everything was going to change. And I told my mom when the letter from the governor came. But anyways, otherwise I kept it a secret. And so the new person has had that experience now as well. And I'm very excited for that announcement to be made. We have planned for May the 4th for the passing of the laurel ceremony. And so keep an eye out if you're interested in watching that. That'll be May 4th of this year. So yeah, shout out to Humanities Washington and Washington State Arts Commission for all the beautiful work they do. But back to this poem, when when they asked me to write it, I knew that the announcement was forthcoming that I would be poet laureate, and it was before it was announced. And they said, the next publication of Spark Magazine will coincide with your being announced as poet laureate, and we'd like to have a poem from you to put into Spark. And I said, oh, sure. And they said, okay, could you write something about dialogue and democracy? I went, oh no, sure. So that's how it's going to be. But it ended up being okay. I went for a lot of walks, and where I worked, there's a nice big wall of trees that kind of goes along the walking path for part of it. And it was nice, in the spring, the cottonwood trees kind of shimmying there in the breeze helped me to feel like, it was somewhat the inspiration for that poem, The Forest for the Trees. Okay, and going on. This poem, I'm super excited. It has really exciting news attached to it. It's called The Glimmer. And if any of you are in Seattle on this Saturday, the 25th at 7:00, I'm going to be with Seattle Pro Musica at like a church in Finney neighborhood, I think is where it's going to be held. There's information on Eventbrite. If you just Google Rena Priest, The Glimmer, or Jared Tate, who is the composer of the song. The Chickasaw composer, he's renowned, and he set this poem to music and composed it made a choral arrangement. So the choir, Seattle Pro Musica, is going to be singing this song on the 25th, this Saturday at 7. So check that out if you can. It'd be great to see you folks there. And this poem is called The Glimmer. From darkness, the idea of self, blood, water, a soul. My body, a brief victory over death by making breath. Thoughts and actions in a series of moments expressed. A cup filled with bliss and the movement of breath. Pulling itself into emptiness, water between stones, disappearing, how quickly it goes. I leave with my breath, I return with my breath, and I understand the tides. They are spun in currents by the exchange of breath. For kisses branded on flesh, we claim each with each, join names to our tongues, weld our memories to breath. In our chests, each moment dies for the next. Singeing shut the spaces between each allotted breath, smelting our lives first into glitter, then into ash in this breathtaking glimmer above death, where we make breath. So that poem is written, it's actually written in a form the form is called a ghazal, and it's not a true ghazal. They're couplets. And at the second line of each couplet, the last word is repeated throughout the poem. So the word in this one is breath. If it were a true ghazal, the last line would have my name in it. So it would go, smelting our lives, first into glitter, then into ash, in this breathtaking glimmer above death, Rena, where we make breath. So that would be a true ghazal, but I didn't see any need to put my name in there. But just a little fun note about form, in case you're interested in trying out new forms. That one's a fun one. So let's see here. Where shall we go next? Try this one. Okay, so this poem is called Daffodils, and it's after a poem by Wordsworth that I really love thinking about. It's called I Wandered as Lonely as a Cloud. And he talks about being depressed, and then he comes up over a hillside and he sees these daffodils swaying in the breeze, and then he feels uplifted and light. And this is something that poetry has always done for me, and I've gone to poetry for that feeling of like release from the mundane, or whatever is troubling me. And that being the case, in my earlier work, I would give readings and people would always come up to me and ask questions, and it's hard to answer them. So I use this poem to answer these questions, and it's called Daffodils after Wordsworth. The Indigenous poet writes life-affirming poems about daffodils. Her audience says, but you're oppressed. The Indigenous poet writes poems of outrage about oppression. Nobody cares. She gets depressed. The Indigenous poet gets requests for poems about being Indigenous. But all my poems are about being Indigenous. The Indigenous poet isn't considered an Indigenous poet because shouldn't you write about genocide? The Indigenous poet tries to write poems about genocide. Her poet spirit dies. Genocide gets the job done. The Indigenous poet says thanks to Tamhuila and writes about daffodils and the untouchable beauty of living a poet's life. So, that phrase in there, thanks to Tamhuila, that is from my Chlomichasen, my tribal language, and it means what the hail, hail that comes down from the sky. We didn't have swear words in our Chlomichasen, and we didn't have any concept of hell, which is so beautiful. I almost said steng to spachwang, which would have been what the fog, but that's inappropriate. Okay, so let's see, onward. I'm excited to talk with you all. I'll read a couple more poems and then we'll start a Q&A. And then maybe in the midst of a Q&A, if I have a poem that answers questions, I can read that. Let's see here. Well, I'll read this one. This one is actually just out in a new anthology that's put together by Empty Bowl Press, who have published an anthology of salmon poems that I collected as part of my my work as Poet Laureate of Washington State. So Empty Bowl Press, they have a series called the Madrona series or the Madrona Project. And their most recently published Madrona Project was around the theme of public art. So they reached out to poets with a call for submissions about a public artwork that we felt connected to. And I wrote this one about Nancy Holt's Rock Rings Stone Enclosure, which is land art that is outside, that's on the Western Washington University campus. And it used to be, so when I was a child, I've interacted with this sculpture for many, many years. I first discovered it. Our family used to go every year to the spring powwow at Western Washington University in Carver Gym. And so I was up there, with my cousins, and we kind of were hanging out, and then we got bored. So we decided to go wander around campus. We must have been about 8 or 9, maybe. And so we wandered. We just kind of like were wandering around through the sculpture garden at Western, and then we ended up way at the southern tip of campus. And there was a big field there before all of the new buildings came in, and there was this sculpture, and it's really beautiful. It's made out of stone that was quarried in just up the road in British Columbia. But the stone glows in the sunlight. It's just really this beautiful kind of coppery brown color, and it's built in just one ring and then a ring in the middle, and it doesn't have a roof or anything, but it's when to a child it looks like a castle out in the middle of a field. And so we made up all kinds of mythology about it, and it's public art, so we could play on it and walk through it and everything else. But anyway, this is called Round Dance. I've heard that a triangle is the strongest shape. Okay, perhaps. But a circle will always circle back. For its reliable tenacity, nature loves a circle. A circle is relentless. We've been going in circles on this rock for eons, a fractal making songs as generations spin along, spinning out new variations with each turn in the cycle, New tyrants, new saviors, new hungers, new flavors, new yet patently familiar. A drum is a circle, a community is a circle, a yurt, a turret, an igloo, a powwow, a pantoum, the hero's journey, a day, a year, the tides, the moon. An iris, a pupil, a nipple, a breast, one circle, a ripple into the next, an ovum, a cell, splitting like an atom, exploding, growing, arms, legs, joys, griefs, ascending and circling back, 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 all the way back to the tomb, dust and ash, you'll be back. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Is it a comfort or a horror? It's both. It's everything, and it would be overwhelming. But here we are again, where we retract to void, relax. Let the song hold you wrapped. Nature loves a circle. So I wrote that poem for that sculpture, knowing it was built the year before I was born out of stone that is millions and millions of years old, and it will be there for a very long time. And anyhow, yeah, so that's that poem. I hope you go visit it. It's a really cool sculpture. I took a picture. I was up there during the pandemic, like a few years ago, and wandering around and just playing around, and my husband and I were taking pictures, and I posted them to Instagram, and nobody was supposed to be traveling anywhere, and so one of my aunties on Instagram said, "Oh, now where are you?" "Are you in Europe?" I said, "No, I'm in Bellingham." So it's kind of a cool little treasure. Go check it out if you're around there. Actually, the whole sculpture garden at Western is pretty spectacular, so highly recommend that. All right, I will close this section of the reading. Well, no, I'll read two more. Since it's almost beach fire season, gosh, I'm looking forward to that. I'll read this one, which is in my beaches book, Northwest Know-How Beaches, where you can learn about 29 beautiful beaches between Semiahmoo up on the Canadian border in Lummy's ancestral homelands, all the way down to Sunset Bay State Park in Coos Bay, Oregon. So between the border of Washington at the north and the border of Oregon at the south, there are all of these amazing beaches. And so I write about those, and there are legends and there are poems in the book as well, together with fun facts and everything you could ever want to know about any of these beaches that I've shared. But this poem is in that collection, and it's called Beach Fire, and it's a pantoum. I chose the pantoum format for all of the poems in the book, because whenever I would go visit one of these beaches, there would be this sound of waves, and that repetition, the cascading, it like comes back. And in a pantoum, it does the same thing. You'll hear the repetition of phrases throughout, cascading throughout the poem, and it just reminded me of waves. And in poems, of course, you want form to follow function, and so they're all pantoums. This is called Beach Fire. Measure wealth by how well you enjoy the hours, fluttering by in praise of sunshine and the ocean breeze, whispering love songs across waves that kiss the beach. This wealth takes work, and absolutely no work at all, fluttering by in praise of sunshine and the ocean breeze. Don't mistake leisure for laziness. This gratitude is rigorous. This wealth takes work, and absolutely no work at all. This gift of a moment to be alive, to feel at peace. Don't mistake leisure for laziness. This gratitude is rigorous, to be filled up and satisfied by a day at the beach. This gift of a moment to be alive, to feel at peace. It means your heart fire flames a lovely heat, to be filled up and satisfied by a day at the beach. You could toast marshmallows by that warmth. It means your heart fire flames a lovely heat, the glowing embers, a boundless source of power. You could toast marshmallows by that warmth, whispering love songs across waves that kiss the beach. The glowing embers, a boundless source of power. Measure wealth by how well you enjoy the hours. Okay, and so I'll go ahead and close with this poem, which is it was originally written as a lullaby for I was asked to write a book, to write a something that might become like a little baby board book. It won't because it's not quite right for that. But it is it's a poem that started out as a lullaby, and it's called Dream Passage. On the path we walk towards purpose, if we feel we've lost our way, if our confidence deserts us and we fear we've gone astray, when the road stretched out before us is a challenging terrain, this is when we search our heart for a passage back to grace. Our dreams have wisdom to impart if we are true and brave, and though the night is dark, there is always a new day. When every door we try is locked and the view out every window is of that lonely road we walked, full of worry, want, and woe. When the stream of life within is blocked by living in our sorrow, this is when we search our heart for a passage to tomorrow. Our dreams have wisdom to impart if we are true to what we feel. Yes, indeed, the night is dark, but our dreams have answers to reveal. So there we go. Finishing off with the lullaby. And then I am happy to hear your questions and to have a chat through the chat.
Yes, Catty out. Yeah, Oiklo, thank you everyone again for, thank you everyone again for being with us here tonight. We have a special treat. Doing the Q&A this evening is going to be a student from our 499 class here in Vancouver, Cynthia.
Okay. Hi, my name is
Hi.
Cynthia Salad. My introduction. I'm a humanities major with concentrations in English, foreign languages, and literature with a creative writing minor. So writing became one of my passions and interests because it kind of allows me to look into other cultures together with art and also different languages and being able to learn them. So my goals for the future are to get my work published and to become a teacher, a writer, and an artist all together. So they are my passion and they're important for me. So that's why I follow that path. So it is really like a pleasure to be here and these questions tonight. So let's check. So I have a question over here. It's my personal question. So I have a quote that I got from the book Patriarchy Blues. The poem is the Encyclopedia Britannica, Sunshine a Mosquito, page 34. So I found this quote, will you eat paper and mental illness and secrets? So my question is, how do you find ways to write expressions such as this quote?
Let's see here. Can you use paper? I'll read this poem. I'll read the whole poem. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is called the Encyclopedia Britannica, Sunshine a Mosquito. Strays with the blood of 100,000 stick people. The confetti is a wilted sickness, pox against glittering sunshine and puddles. Can you climb into a person's longing for you and float away? You can wear balloons in your hair instead of roses. Can you make a hen forge checks with her chicken scratch? Can you put an egg Can you put her egg under a down pillow and see if it hatches into a smaller down pillow, a decorative pillow? You can write I love you in the dirt if you have a sharp enough hatchet. A bunch of pens, 2 songs, and a heartbreak will easily fit into a courtberry basket. Would you eat paper covered in mental illness and secrets? Could you breathe rain clouds? Could you breathe lightning from the lungs behind your lungs? If I were shrunk down to the size of a pea, I would do regular sized crossword puzzles with a miniature pen. It would be my daily workout. If I had a tail, I would use it to make gestures so everyone would know when I was becoming agitated. I forget sometimes about this poem. It's funny. I get into these like little habits or these little routines of reading whatever kind of seems like it goes together to fit a theme that I'm kind of writing towards or whatever. And so the older poems, you know, I forget about them a lot. And I like to this one I know was written by prompts. I don't think I acknowledged the prompt in the book, though. Gosh, that's terrible of me. Acknowledgements, desires, desire. No, I don't. Oh, no, that's terrible. Okay. Well, I can't actually, but maybe this is why I don't mention it, because I can't actually think of what the prompt was called. It was a really long time ago, and it was from a book, and I'm not even sure which book anymore. And it was like something about it was a list of things like think of, and the whole poem wasn't written. It was just like little passages inspired by certain parts of the prompt, and then repeated, like ask a ridiculous question, ask another ridiculous question. And I was like, what if a hen could forge checks with her chicken scratch? And then I thought about the eggs under the pillow. Like, does it, you know, just the absurd things like, does one thing make the influence, does it influence it to be like itself? So like if you hatched an egg under a down pillow, would it be a down pillow? I don't know. It's crazy talk, right? But this is where we do that. It's poetry. It's so fun. I love that. Would you eat paper covered in mental illness and secrets? I think that probably just came from, I had a friend at the time of writing this who was struggling with the onset of schizophrenia, like discovery that he had this frightening mental illness. And, you know, there was a lot of like, where does it come from? You know, superstition too, thinking about superstition and people's beliefs about, you know, why one thing and you know, cause and effect, right? That it's not, throughout history, we have misplaced the cause of things drastically, you know, like with the terrible consequences, like the burning of women as witches and things like that. Anyhow, I think that kind of went far afield from your question, but I mostly just make poems out of my writing practice, which I think probably the other reason that I didn't credit that or didn't acknowledge that prompt is that I know this one was assembled from different little things that I had written in journals throughout the years. When I'm really stuck and I'm not writing at all, I will sometimes go back through the journals and like highlight things that I think are interesting and see if I can write more in that direction and see what comes out of it. And sometimes really cool things ended up happening from that. Like I wrote about, I used to write cool things that would happen to me during the day or things that I would learn or hear. And when my daughter was in the 5th grade, she came home and she was like, Mom, guess what? And she had this big, exciting story that when you get the chills, when your hair stands up on end, that is your body trying to grow hair really, really fast so that you don't get cold. And she learned that in her 5th grade science class. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And I wrote that down in a journal and I put it away for many years. And I didn't really think about it. And then I was going through my journals looking for something else completely unrelated. And I read that and I kind of chuckled to myself. And then I started to write this poem about miracles because the Yellow Medicine Review had a call out for poems about miracles. And so I was writing this poem about miracles and I got stuck. I made this statement I'll read the poem, and it's called Miraculous. The math has been done. The fact of your existence is 700 trillion to one, more or less. You've played the cosmic slot machine and won. Struck the freaking jackpot, my friend. So are you a miracle? Yes, I'd say so. I'd also say that remembering to put out my recycling on Wednesday is a miracle of equal magnitude. Or is it Thursday? We must not be narrow in our definition of a miracle if we are to lead miraculous lives. The body believes in miracles. When you get goosebumps, it's the feeling of your body trying to grow hair really, really fast so that you don't get cold. Your body loves you, will attempt a miracle to make you comfortable. If you can happen and I can happen and we're all just mostly songs and bent light, then it stands to reason that hunger and war and all that difficult history and your heartaches and more can all be eased by merciful, miraculous softness, right? So, I was writing this poem about miracles and I got to that, I made that statement. So I said, we must not be narrow in our definition of a miracle if we are to lead miraculous lives. And then I'm like, well, the body is a miracle. The body believes in miracles, right? So I wrote that and then I was stuck and I was like, can I really even claim that? How do I know that the body believes in miracles? And then I remembered, I remembered reading that little passage about my daughter talking about what your body is doing when you get the chills and your hair stands on end. And so then I just plugged that in there and it worked. And so, it all just kind of comes together. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna read another question from the chat. Over here we have a question from Yes or says, you take on science and poetry is really interesting. Did you ever consider pursuing a career in the sciences? And so how did you settle on pursuing poetry and getting your MFA?
Yeah. Well, I feel like in hindsight, I was always just kind of meant to do poetry, weirdly, or writing. I like to tell stories, but I love the sound of language and words. I remember being really small, and before I knew how to read, I knew that if I brought this book to my mom, the one with the fishes on it, that it would make her kind of sing. I could bring it to her and I could sit with her and she'd be like, one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. And then, it was this fun little thing. So I think I've always really loved the sound of our human voice and the weird things that it does and the way that it makes music. It has music just embedded in it inherently. And so often the words that we use are onomatopoeia, right? Like you can have the word like tintinnabulation. It sounds like a bell ringing, din, 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 din. Or morose. It just feels like, oh, so sad. It's just always astonishing to me the way that language works, and it's so fun. I didn't pursue a career in the sciences, although I am so interested in scientific discoveries, mainly because the processes of science it seems to me like those would be kind of tedious. You have to do a lot of repetition of tedious activities to get to these exciting discoveries, right? I was reading about how the theory of learned helplessness came about, and what they did was they shocked the feet of dogs, and then some of them had a button where they would flail around, and if they pushed the button, the shocking would stop. And some of them had a button where if they pushed the button, nothing would happen. And then they did a follow-up experiment where they would shock the feet again. And the dogs who pushed the button and made the shocking stop, they found a way out of that situation. Whereas the dogs who pushed the button and it didn't stop, they just, when the shocking of their feet started, they just kind of sat down and were like, whatever, let's just wait until it's going to be over. And I think about like that process and I'm like, oh, it'd be horrible to like shock dogs, but even just like the repetition of like, we have to do this to 50 different subjects to make sure that it's like the sample is large enough or whatever. It just seems like not fun. And I also really suck at math, so I could never really get in there anyways. It's probably the easier and most true answer. My daughter is trying to get into STEM right now. She's thinking of doing biology, and she's coming up on the math that the math teachers I'm friends with say is the barrier. Like it's that math, I think it's 212 or 211 is like the dividing factor, like, where some will go forward and go into a career in STEM and some will be like, I think I'll try communications or whatever, and I never actually even made it to that math. So I just got like through the GUR and then coasted off into my major in the humanities. So that's the true answer, true story.
Yeah, same. I did the same thing. I'm just going through humanities without doing math or any science. But
Yeah.
it's really interesting to learn about it. That's just like all those things they have to do to be able to get it. Yeah. Let me see, another question. Let's see, a question from Karen Weathermoon. Says, what are the takeaways that you are taking from your time as our state poet laureate? That's what I read. Okay. Or in other words, how has this experience changed your thoughts about this state, about the state of poetry, about yourself?
Cool. Big question. So takeaways. Well, I'm most excited about the anthology of salmon poetry. And before I get too far into the answering this question, I'm going to go ahead and read a poem from that anthology so that you all can have a little preview. And it relates to the last question about the sciences and is probably also a good answer to that question. This is a poem by Rob Lewis, who's a Bellingham poet. And this is the first poem in the collection in the anthology. And it's called, I Went Looking for the Wild One. I went looking for the wild one, the howler, the Vedic tramp, the one for whom the wounded hillsides are inner burns, whose blood is stained with the old love wine of poet and earth, warrior poet slinging battle flack out at the static, shattering polite conversations everywhere. I look in the anthologies, listening for echoes, traced for signs in the quarterlies, magazines, best ofs. I learned it's been a good year for poetry, grants and awards coming in, contests and prizes proliferating. The wise gray consensus counsels a return to the classics. Meanwhile, poor salmon scientist holds extinction in a palm full of numbers with nothing but data to howl with. So I love this idea of, like, what do we do with the knowledge that we have if we can't make people feel it, right? Like we can't relate to it. And often as a poet, writers, we work in solitude and it's hard work and it's lonely work. And you always wonder, like, does this mean anything to anybody? What does it mean? What am I doing here, really? So sometimes these questions, these doubts arise. And as poet laureate, I've been able to interact with so many different people throughout the state. And I've been able to assure them, that their work is meaningful and that their work is important. And also to have that feeling, to experience that feeling myself, to be assured that there are audiences or there's ways to connect with people through this important work of poetry that we do. And a way to bring an understanding of the world and to be in community with others in this like beautiful and profound way. Yeah, it's been a really wonderful experience. And my experience of Washington is that it's a much bigger state than I initially had thought. I thought I'd pretty much seen it all and been everywhere, but now now I think I really have seen it all and been everywhere. It's been really cool to see how much our state loves poetry. There's this event marks something like I've done now. I visited more than 150 organizations in my role as poet laureate. And sometimes those were multi-day visits. Sometimes those were, well, like this is my second visit for this particular request. But sometimes, I would, like when I went out to Lopez Island, I was there for 4 days and I did, I read at a gala and then I read to a small group in front of the library, and then I gave a workshop, and then was going to introduce the Lopez Island Poet Laureate, but I had to go because I would have missed the ferry and I couldn't leave until the next day. So it actually almost ended up being a 5-day endeavor, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Anyhow, so there have been over 150 organizations visited as my term during my term as poet laureate, and it's been wonderful. And I've learned a lot about how much love the people of our state have for the art and craft of poetry. It's been cool.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, we have another question from Dora. Says, do you ever find yourself running low on creative energy? How do you maintain it and restore that energy?
I do. I feel like responding to a lot of communications, like emails, really depletes the creative juice, because you're using that muscle for like a purpose that is, it's like creative, but it's not. Like, you have to be responsive to whoever you're communicating with, but it's also just kind of, it's conveying information, but not in a way that feels, and it's important, obviously, but it's not, so when you're writing poetry, you want it to be meaningful, you want it to convey information, you want it to make sense, or at least to do something for, to evoke something perhaps. And all of those things go into an email, unfortunately, but it's also just, it's not a poem. So I think that really, it's very depleting. And so what I try to do to reset that is, just kind of take some time for myself, go for walks. I like to go for walks, sleep late, stay up until the middle of the night and enjoy that silence. It's tricky. Also, you have to trust the silence. Like if you're feeling depleted, just acknowledge that maybe you're doing other things right now, and that there will be the time for creativity will circle back, or you make time for it. Sometimes it's hard. I know when I was writing federal grants, I really fell out of love with language, and my creative flow was severely depleted because that's, you're working with a language that is not, it's kind of like the opposite of poetry. But I ended up from that experience using this form called 20 Little Poetry Projects. And I got this whole book out of it. It's called Sublime Subliminal. And the 20 Little Poetry Project has, you have to like put in the name of a famous person and the name of a famous place and a foreign language phrase and all of these other things into every poem. And so I'll just read this one. It's called Song of the Blue Cricket. Your face is a trapdoor to euphoria. I see you. I want to see more of you. Your face is a bell. I salivate lusts that taste like abiding bliss, a sweet yet refreshing mix of melons and lemons grown by nymphs. Your face is relentless. I can't forget how it feels, like the lanate riff of metal from a germanium fuzz bass pedal. I skip across the surface of your glance and sink into its rippling silence. Eons later, I wash ashore smaller, softer, in waves that break like laughter from the crowded cabernets of Montparnasse. I go there to ask Alice Prynne about the photographs. Was man a chimper when he caught her likeness in his light bucket? Your face relents. I forget how it feels, and so I yield to the urge to yield. Let the devil make a nest in my head. The length of a snake is the snake's secret until it's dead. The blue cricket of transcendence keeps a measuring tape under his bed. He says, darling, dry your tears, and ever hence will live in temples where ample residual resins smolder in unused confessionals. Qu'est-ce que c'est bruit un éclat de rire? Let the soul dangle like a circus aerialist on a thread, a spider on the ceiling, your gaze. Is it a safety net or a web? So the reason that it made me fall in love with language again to write this collection is because sometimes making sense was just for me, like for my own entertainment, and that was a lot of fun. But I feel like when the poet is entertained, the reader is sometimes entertained, and people have told me how much they enjoy like going through these poems like a little Easter egg hunt. Like they'll be like, Alice Prynne, who's Alice Prynne? And then if you Google Alice Prynne, you find out that she was Kiki Montparnasse, who was the lover of Man Ray, who is a famous photographer. And then all of a sudden, some of what I say in here makes sense. Like I go there to ask Alice Prynne about the photographs. Was man a chimper when he caught her likeness in his light bucket? And a light bucket is the slang. And also chimper. These are both slang shortened language that photographers use. So a chimper is photographer speak for a photographer who, when every time he takes a picture, he goes, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I thought that was hysterical. And a light bucket is a huge lens that, like captures a lot of light. So I think they use them for nighttime photography and things like that. But you learn some things and it's a lot of fun. And also things, so the slang was fun to incorporate. Each of these poems have like a saying or an idiom. This one, it's the length of a snake is the snake's secret until it's dead. So it's like, well, you'll never know until it's too late is it's a way of saying that, or you won't know until it doesn't matter anymore. It's just kind of an interesting way of saying it. And it's actually from a Russian idiom book that was translated into English that I found in an antique shop. So, mining these to make language interesting and beloved to me, again, was a good time. The foreign language phrase in this poem is "Qu'est-ce que c'est bruit un éclat de rire," which is French for "What is that noise? A burst of laughter." There's a lot of, I kind of butcher some of the foreign language phrases in here, so it's kind of fun to read them. And if there are like native speakers in the audience, they'll laugh at my pronunciation, and we all have a great time. But some of these foreign language phrases are a lot of fun. Like there's one in here from the Italian. I have a friend who's Italian, and he taught me I said, hey, Matteo, what's an idiom in Italian that you can teach me for this book I'm writing? And he said, oh, here's one. Mal comune mezzo gaudio, which means a shared evil is half a joy. So like if I'm miserable and you're also miserable, then I'm less miserable because I know you're miserable too. I was like, that's so messed up. but it's funny, people laugh at that one too. So yeah, that's part of what I do when I am really stuck in my creativity is I try to find a little form to work within, and then knowing that you're working within a finite space seems to make it expansive. It like makes it infinite. The possibilities become endless. There's a really good prompt that I do in one of my workshops called A Poem is a Possibility. And it's from Kim Adonicio's book, Ordinary Genius, where she says, imagine a sentence as a hall with a series of doors. Each door you go through is another way of, expressing more about that initial sentence. So the exercise is I have people do free writes and then choose one sentence from their free write and then write 5 different things that come after it that are all separate, like different ways of, if you were going to write your own, choose your own adventure, every option would be way different from the one before it. And that's kind of a fun little activity. So yeah, using limitations really opens the world up for you when you're stuck creatively.
Thank you. I'm curious about something. You said because like you have to write professionally when you like send your work to other companies or like other like publishers. Like have you ever tried to send an email that's just like instead of like being professional, it's just kind of like poetry, kind of like a poet, like poetry email. I don't know. Like yeah, like do you feel like you've done that maybe?
I've never done that.
Yeah.
No, I should try maybe someday.
Maybe it's just like I'm thinking because like it's supposed to be professional, but like if you're sending it to someone you already know, like they know about like they feel comfortable, right? Like sending maybe one that feels like a poetry.
That would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mathematician friend, I'm getting warm. I'm going to take my jacket off. My mathematician friend, he actually has gotten into the habit of writing limericks. So he sends me texts in limerick form and it's hilarious. So, I don't know. I try to send limericks back and that's kind of fun, but I'm also just kind of like, I'm going to answer another email. No, I don't know. Yeah, I should try it sometime. We'll see. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Do you have another question? Yeah. Okay. So another question would be from Drew. He says, you sometimes use epigraphs in your poems and in patriarchy blues. Do you usually start a poem from an epigraph or add it after?
That's a good question. Sometimes it comes after. Sometimes it comes before. It just kind of depends. Like, let's see. And sometimes I don't use them at all. But if I can think of something that is like perfect, well, like the one about the birds, the fish singing on the reef. So that actually started from the epigraph. And that is actually also part of an essay. But sometimes, let's see, for what is virtue but the lack of strong temptation? Oh yeah, that's a good quote. Sometimes they come later, and it's weird too. Like when they come later, it's almost as if the universe is sending them to me. Like I'll write the poem and I'll feel like it needs something and I'll leave it there and it'll just be there. And then I'll be reading something and then like the perfect epigraph will pop out at me and be like, put this there. And I'll be like, oh my God, that's perfect. And so I'll just add it. I'll add it afterwards. But sometimes the poem starts from the epigraph just immediately.
It seems we're gonna ask one more question. That's gonna be it. So our last question is gonna be from Emma. Says, how has your experience been with music made with your poetry?
So I have one poem that is currently out in the world as a song. And if I knew I could share it easily, I would, but I think that it's hard to make Spotify play through a medium like this. I think maybe possibly because of copyright and stuff. But the song is on YouTube and Spotify, and it's called The Index. And the composer is Thaddeus Walters, or no, Theo Walters. Walters is his last name. Anyhow, that sounds cool. He sent it to me. It's on vinyl. I have it on like pressed vinyl. Me reading this poem under his composition that went over it, and it's really cool. I love it. I think he did a beautiful job setting that poem to music, and I'm super excited to hear how Jared Tate has set The Glimmer into a choral arrangement. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. It's just really exciting. I'm super looking forward to this Saturday. And if you're around, if any of you are in Seattle, please come. I think it'll be really fun. It'll be awesome. Yeah. Otherwise, I haven't really had my poems set to music. The Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship said they set one of my poems about a whale to music, but I was obligated to be somewhere else before they set the date for that, so I didn't get to hear it, but I heard it went pretty well.
Hey, thank you so much. Okay, I have to leave now. Bye-bye. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and be with you this evening. So, Haishka.
Katsiao Yao, Rena, for honoring us tonight with your poetry, your words. It's always a pleasure to meet another poet, especially the Washington State Poet Laureate. I just think that's one of the most amazing things that I've got to experience myself this year. So again, Katsiao Yao Rena. And don't forget to join the Visiting Writers Series, virtual and in-person reading and Q&A with multimedia fiber artist, playwright, and poet Sarah Hennessy. And that's going to be next Tuesday, March 28th at 6 p.m. Katsiao Yao, Oikalo, thank you everyone, and good night.
Haishka, Lainuksan sa. Haikucha.